Today, we're diving into a story that honestly feels like it was ripped from a spy trailer, but it is all too real. It's about how one school videographer used his official job as the perfect cover to secretly film the Kremlin's nationwide strategy to militarize an entire generation of Russian kids. And our story starts with this quote right here from the whistleblower himself, Pavel Talankin. He's talking about his hometown, Karabakh, and he loves it. But here's the thing. This town is, by pretty much any measure you can think of, a complete and utter ecological disaster zone. And when you look at the numbers, it's just staggering. UNESCO actually once called Karabakh the most toxic place on Earth. The average life expectancy can be as low as 38 years old. The air, the water, the ground itself, it's all deeply, profoundly poisoned. And you have to understand this physical toxicity because it sets the stage for a very different kind of poison, an ideological one that starts to seep into the town's school. So here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the town itself, then we'll zoom out to look at these sweeping changes to Russia's entire education system. From there, we'll follow Pavel's secret filming, see what his camera actually captured, trace his incredible escape, and finally, ask what this all means for the future of a generation being taught to fight. Okay, first up, a town drowning in poison, where the ground, as you'll see, is just as toxic as the ideology that was about to follow. So for more than 100 years, this one industry, copper smelting, has completely defined Karabakh. And it's created a landscape that looks genuinely post-apocalyptic. I want you to picture a mountain of industrial waste that's 2 kilometers long, and rivers that literally flow bright orange because the contamination is 500 times the legal limit. It's a place that shows you, in the most brutal way, how the goals of the state have always come before the well-being of the people. And that toxic environment is the perfect backdrop for what came next. Which brings us to our second section, the Kremlin's new classroom, and how Russia's entire education system was radically redesigned right after February 2022. Now look at this timeline, because it shows just how incredibly fast and systematic this whole thing was. This wasn't some slow, gradual shift. No, this was a top-down, lightning-fast overhaul. In just a couple of years, the whole system, from preschool all the way up to high school, was completely re-engineered to serve this new state ideology. And this new system, it really rests on 3 main pillars. First, you've got these mandatory weekly lessons called Conversations About the Important, basically teachers reading directly from government scripts. Second, ritual. Every single week now starts with a flag-raising ceremony and singing the national anthem. And third, this thing called the Movement of the First, a state-run youth group designed to control pretty much all of a student's life outside the classroom. Think of it like a modern version of the Soviet pioneers. And right in the middle of all of this, we find the man at the center of our story. This is the videographer's secret war, where an official job became the perfect cover for an act of resistance. This became Pavel Talankin's new reality. After the war began, his job as the school videographer was suddenly split in 2. His official mission? Film all these new patriotic events to prove to the Ministry of Education that the school was following orders. His secret mission? Use that exact same camera to film the raw, unfiltered reality of what was happening, knowing that if he got caught, he could face life in prison for high treason. You know, he didn't just wake up one day and decide to become a whistleblower. It was more of a slow burn, a kind of moral exhaustion. He started with these small, almost funny acts of protest, like he'd play Lady Gaga's version of the U.S. national anthem over the school speakers, or he'd change the pro-war Z symbols that were painted on the windows into an X. These were the first signs of a man really being pushed to his breaking point. So what exactly was he filming? What did he see that pushed him to risk everything? Well, let's go inside the indoctrination machine and take a look at what Pavel Talankin's secret camera revealed. Okay, this is what schools started to look like. Students weren't just learning math and history anymore. They were literally learning how to assemble and disassemble machine guns. They were practicing how to throw grenades, learning first aid for gunshot wounds. They were forced to write letters of support to soldiers on the front lines. And, get this, they were even receiving weapons training from actual Wagner Group mercenaries. School had become a pipeline for the state's war machine. Now, you might think everyone was just going along with this out of fear, but that's not the whole story. This quote from one of the history teachers at the school shows you the other side. There are true believers who've completely embraced this new ideology. For him, loving your country is like loving your mother. It's this unconditional duty, and anyone who criticizes it is a parasite who should just leave. And this is where things really escalate for Pavel. This brings us to the climax of his journey, the flight of the whistleblower. This is the moment when the war truly comes home, and the risks just become too great to ignore. So, in September 2022, the government announced a partial mobilization. The official number was just over 300,000 men called up. But here's the crucial detail. This mobilization didn't really hit the big cities like Moscow that hard. Instead, it targeted remote, poorer regions just like Karabakh, which ended up having to send a much higher percentage of its men to the front. And for Pavel, the war suddenly became deeply, horribly personal when his former classmate, Artem Volkov, was killed in action. He wanted to film the funeral. He felt he had to document the real cost of all the propaganda he was being forced to film at school. But it was just too dangerous. By that point, everyone was being watched. So instead, he did something else. Something maybe even more powerful. He couldn't use his camera, so he just recorded the audio. In the documentary that was eventually made from his footage, one of the most powerful moments is just a black screen. And all you can hear is the raw, unfiltered sound of Artem's mother sobbing. It's a sound that just cuts through all the propaganda about a glorious, heroic death. By the summer of 2024, the net was closing in. Pavel started spotting police cars parked outside his home. He knew his time was up. With help from his contacts, he booked a fake vacation, fled the country, and somehow managed to smuggle out hundreds of hours of footage, the evidence of everything he had witnessed. So, Pavel got out. But what about the millions of kids still inside that system? That leads us to our final section, a generation's stolen future, and the long-term consequences of raising an entire nation to fight. A huge part of this new curriculum involves just completely rewriting history. They're taking some of the most brutal figures from the Stalinist terror state and rehabilitating them. Lavrenti Beria, the architect of the Gulag system, is now being presented as a symbol of administrative efficiency. These men, who were once villains, are being turned into patriotic role models for a new generation. And the government's goal in all this is incredibly clear and ambitious. They have explicitly stated that by 2030, they want the vast majority of young people in Russia to be patriotically aligned with the state. This isn't just about winning a war. It's about fundamentally reshaping Russian society for decades to come. And they're starting with the youngest, most impressionable citizens. Which brings us all the way back to the beginning and leaves us with one final, sobering thought. This story started in Karabakh, with a ground that was literally poisoned by the priorities of the state. And now that same state is systematically poisoning the ideas in the minds of the children who live there. So the question we're left with is this. When a state poisons the ground its children walk on, and then poisons the ideas they learn, what is left to grow?